Hi, my name is Elmer Bool, and I'm going to talk to you today about the neural programming language. Let me start with our hypothesis, which is if we can develop a language that mimics how humans store and process thoughts, then we can use it to create a high-fidelity programming language. The idea of human thoughts being explained through storage and processes is not new. It's commonly assumed that the human cognitive architecture consists of storage and processing, although the specific division and the interplay between the two are still a matter of debate. The neuroscientific evidence is both supporting this division and making it more complex. With neurUL, we mimic this division from human cognitive neuroscience of storage and processing by creating two separate components. First is the neuralizer, which is for information storage, and the other is the spiker, which is focused on processing, both of which are highly inspired by how human thoughts and brains work. Going back to our hypothesis, by creating this type of programming language, we aim to solve some of the biggest problems in programming: duplication, debuggability, and inconsistencies. Duplication is a rampant yet oft overlooked reality in the field of software development. For example, on this slide, the highlighted lines name, date created, and date last modified represent properties that are duplicated across two different classes, user class and department class. Left unchecked, this duplication can result in the unnecessary consumption of storage, processing, and analytical resources. Ideally, the solution would be to create them once and just link to them wherever necessary. But this is not currently possible. Furthermore, this type of restriction can also be found in all text file-based programming languages. The other problem is debuggability. Currently, large language models are not human-readable, as they contain massive amounts of machine-generated, linked tokenized input. This leads to difficulties in resolving sources, inconsistencies, biases, and hallucinations, mainly due to its lack of transparency. If we can't understand our models, then we cannot debug and correct them, right? Let's now have a look at the basic structure of our programming language. The basic mechanisms of our language are taken from computer science. Then, we use elements from other scientific fields such as philosophy, linguistics, and most importantly, neuroscience. As with human thought and neural cognitive systems, some aspects of our language are used in storage, others for processing, and others for both. Before going into the specific details of our programming language, we will first explain the fundamental mechanisms of all programming languages using a popular language called C#. These mechanisms, namely primitive elements, means of combination, and means of abstraction, enable programming languages to combine simple ideas to form more complex ones. Primitive elements are fundamental language elements of a programming language that serve as its foundation. In C#, it includes types, keywords, operators, and special characters. These primitive elements can then be combined into compound elements by using structures such as statements, properties, classes, and namespaces. Finally, as a means of abstracting by which compound elements can be named and manipulated as units, in C# we have identifiers. On the other hand, in our language, while retaining the fundamental mechanisms of programming languages, we replace the primitive elements and means of combination with concepts that are mostly taken from neuroscience. Neurons serve as one of the primitive elements of our language. Neurons are specialized cells that transmit nerve impulses, also called action potentials, that enable cognition and communication. These action potentials are sudden electrical explosions of a neuron cell body that is triggered when a certain value is reached by the summation of excitatory and inhibitory action potentials from presynaptic neurons. Neurons contain axon terminals that also serve as another primitive element of our language. Axon terminals are branched endings of axons that enable the flow of an action potential from one neuron to another. Neurons on the receiving end of axon terminals are called postsynaptic neurons, while neurons containing the axon terminals, presynaptic neurons. Axon terminals can have varying strengths, which is the average amount of current produced in the postsynaptic neuron. Terminals also have varying effects, which determine whether an action potential of a presynaptic neuron either excites or inhibits the action potential of a postsynaptic neuron. Combining large populations of neurons via their axon terminals result in superstructures called neural networks. This process is the means of combination in our language. Now that we've had a look at how we use neuroscientific concepts as primitive elements and means of combination of our language, let's now discuss how it stores and organizes information using the neuralizer. First, it creates computer simulations of neurons and terminals, which are represented on the user interface by circles and arrows, respectively. Then, it simulates biological neural networks by interconnecting neurons via their terminals. Another way of combining primitive elements is taken from the concepts of extensional definitions and arguments in philosophy. For example, an extensional definition is an object that falls under a certain category. Here, we can say that Zach is an extension of an actor, while an actor is an extension of a person. Considered as statements of a deductive argument, we can conclude that Zach is a person. So, in our language, we were able to use this concept to generalize information. That is, by combining simpler, more specific pieces of information to define bigger, more complex ones. For example, if neuron B is a C and neuron A is a B, then neuron A is a C. The idea of combining simpler pieces of information to form more complex ones is highly represented in linguistics. Here, we have minimalist grammar and dependency grammar that acknowledges this kind of hierarchy to describe how sentences are formed. From minimalist grammar or generative syntax, we have the operation called merge, where a pair of syntactic objects are combined to create a new syntactic object. The new syntactic object can then be merged further to form other syntactic objects. This process of repeatedly applying merge operations is called recursion. Also, in dependency grammar, which is based on the dependency relation, we use dependency trees to analyze how syntactic units depend on each other and how they combine to form a sentence. In this example, the word has a function of a head unit, which has been merged with the word content, which has a function of direct object. We can also see that the word has also been merged with the word message, which has a function of nominal subject, eventually combining into a full sentence. These concepts are used by the neuralizer as a means to combine primitive elements in a way that meaningfully indicates the function of each syntactic unit, such as subjects, direct objects, and head units. Another means of combination in our language was inspired by the neuroscientific concept of grandmother cells. A grandmother cell is a hypothetical neuron that represents a complex but specific concept or object. Essentially, each grandmother cell is at the top of a hierarchy of increasing convergence. For example, Jennifer Aniston is a convergence of the concepts funny, actor, and sexy. By using all the concepts described so far, the neuralizer converts the message instance and its content property in the C# code at the bottom into a network of grandmother cells. In this simulation of the neuralization process, we can see that the neuralizer recursively merges primitive and compound elements, including functions such as case, head, and direct object, with the verbs has and instantiates, the preposition of, and the expression hello world until it converges into a grandmother cell that represents with an even higher fidelity the same expression that is represented by the C# code at the bottom and the dependency tree at the top. Let's now have a look at how the spiker component of neurUL uses its language mechanisms to process information. In addition to the mechanisms discussed so far, our language makes use of the neuroscientific concept called the reflex arc as a means of combining inputs with outputs. The reflex arc is a neurological and sensory mechanism that controls a reflex. With it, an action potential can bypass the brain and use dedicated neural pathways for faster processing. For example, when a stimulus is encountered, the signal from that stimulus will travel up the sensory neuron to the spinal column, There, it will likely pass through a short interneuron before continuing down a motor neuron to the origin of the signal. Then, a contraction of the muscles is triggered, moving the bone. In the spiker component, a reflex arc consists of input neurons, such as actor neurons, a scene neuron, and a react neuron. Interneurons that link sensory neurons with motor neurons, and output neurons that represent responses. Terminals are also coded with varying strengths and effects in order to control the flow of action potentials. Simulating this reflex arc configuration in the spiker component, what will happen is we can say that if Zach is seen at the same time a reaction is permitted, then the interneuron to the left is fully excited as indicated by the 4 green arrows, thereby spiking the response neuron increase volume. On the other hand, the interneuron to the right is not fully excited since the input neuron sexy was not spiked. In neurUL, we can maximize reuse of grandmother cells simply by merging with them. During tests, we saw records reusing values, columns, and data to the point that the database is free of duplicates even at the schema level. Normalization, which is the process of decomposing tables to eliminate data redundancy, is intrinsically enforced by grandmother cells. We can also minimize duplication further by reusing grandmother cells that may be available remotely via external reference URLs. Lastly, AI can be debugged since neurons are human-readable and efficient, and can be used without the need for unnecessary noise such as formatting characters, white space, and special characters. Lastly, based on our tests, we are able to achieve 100% consistent and accurate processing results using only reflex arcs. In conclusion, a biologically inspired language benefits from neural and symbolic approaches by enabling human readability and transparency while ensuring efficiency and minimizing noise and duplication. Here are some references. Yep. Yeah. Thank you.